For our next panel on EdTech, we have with us our moderator, Neha Bal, former CEO, Toronto Business Development Center. And with her, we have our panelists, Gaurang Torvikar, CEO and co-founder, Indoors, Tarun Sani, CEO, Vidyakul, and Shri Bose, co-founder, Piper. These experts will enlighten us about the recent trends in the Indian EdTech sector and why this is a great time to be involved.
Welcome everybody to the EdTech panel hosted by the ThinkIndia event. As you already know, this event has been led on behalf of Brand Capital International to throw opportunistic light on the broader India opportunity as to why companies need to scale in India. What does it take for a company to be successful in India? What are the challenges, roadblocks? And I think we have a very interesting panel today because the world is looking at India right now when it comes to the education tech growth story. And when I talk specifically of EdTech, 2020 and the early year of 2021 has been a transformational story for how students perceive education, how kids perceive learning, the methodology of traditional schools, offline learning models, everything has been disrupted. I mean, you have kids in your house right now who are glued on their computer screens on Zoom and through other platforms. So this is going to be a very interesting discussion about what were the learnings up to 2020, what's in store for 2021 and beyond, and how India as a growth market is playing a significant role in scaling these tech companies. On that note, I would like to introduce our panelists today. We have three interesting panelists. I would like to introduce you to Shri Bose, who's the co-founder of Piper. This is a company that sells build-yourself computer kits that uses this as a platform for kids to learn more about computer science, STEM. So that's on with Shri Bose. We have Gaurang, who's the CEO of Indoors. Indoors is a skill validation platform which helps candidates validate their technology skills and also helps companies match with better candidates using blockchain as a backbone. And we also have Tarun Sani, who's the founder and CEO of Vidyakul. Vidyakul is an interactive e-learning platform specifically foraying into the early education, which is a K-12 education space in India, which corresponds to grade 6 to grade 12 perhaps. And what this platform does is this platform has created an online platform for students and teachers to get access to quality education at affordable prices. What makes this platform unique is the vernacular strength, which we will talk about, why this need immensely came to the platform in vernacular. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for taking out time and joining us on the Think India panel. I would like to straight away jump into the immediate question that I have, and maybe I'll use this opportunity. This question is directed to you. I mean, when I read your bio, you were a student at Harvard University, and I think you've accomplished much more than many people would have ever accomplished in their entire professional lives. And I was reading that you actually led a project in ovarian cancer, and from cancer to Harvard to education tech. Tell us your journey. Like, what was your inspiration, and how did you develop Piper?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. It's a bit of a winding story, so I always feel like I need to explain how it happened altogether. But you're absolutely right. So when I was in high school, my grandfather actually passed away from cancer, and at the time, I remember traveling to India, to going to my grandparents' home in Kolkata, and like seeing how sick he had gotten from this really aggressive form of cancer, and just not being able to understand it in the context of what I was learning in school. Like, it just didn't seem like it made sense. And so I was a really sort of driven high schooler, and my parents were definitely very big on making sure that like education was at the forefront of our minds. And they really encouraged me to like think a little bit more broadly instead of just being like, I don't get it, to like actually try and go find answers. And they were very open about the fact that they had none of the answers. My dad is an engineer. He was like, I mean, I can try and teach you things, but really this is not something I know about. So like go find resources, go find things for yourself. Um, so I ended up starting to read online, just finding everything I could find on cancer. I read everything from like really great like journal articles that like I didn't understand at all to like conspiracy theory. And like I read everything I could get my hands on. And eventually I realized that I was sort of asking questions that really we didn't have the answers to yet. And that's sort of what drove me to wanting to do research, to wanting to be the person to answer those questions. So when I was in high school, I actually found graduate school professors. I only found one professor who was willing to sort of take me on and give me a chance. But I went into her lab and started working on ovarian cancer and on understanding how cancer becomes more aggressive, how it processes energy in super weird ways that makes it a very like aggressive disease that we can't treat as well. Um, and because of this research, and in part because of the fact that I had like found all of these opportunities on my own, I ended up finding an opportunity to present this work to the world. Like I found a chance where I could tell more people about it instead of just my parents and my brother, who at this point were really sick of hearing about it. Um, so I actually entered into the first ever Google Global Science Fair in 2011, so exactly 10 years ago. And I ended up being the grand prize winner of the Google Global Science Fair. And at the time, I remember getting asked a lot by reporters, by other students, like, how did you get started? How do we get started? What is like the sort of path that a student uses to get excited about science? And I never felt like I had a particularly good answer for the world of tech. For biology, I was like, okay, you go online, you read this, you do this, like this is what I did. It all makes sense. But for tech, and which was what I was getting asked about a lot, I never had an answer. And it really, really bothered me. So at the time, I was an undergrad at Harvard and just surrounded by the spirit of innovation, of being like, okay, well, if you don't have a solution, make the solution. And that's exactly what Piper was born from this frustration of being very, very committed to wanting to give other students, like, okay, this is your tool. So Piper was really born out of that like frustration around not having a great tool to sort of point kids to and say like this is the tool you use, and like you won't feel like you're dumb, you won't feel like you're failing a test. You will feel like you're playing a game, and you'll be learning really powerful things that you can think about applying to the daily problems of life, which is why I'm really excited to think about India, to think about expanding Piper, expanding the educational products that we've created to the next generation of Indian inventors. That's what we're very, very excited
And
about.
and when you say like this innovation mindset, like I would like to touch upon this point that while we have education platforms in schooling, in courses and exams and test prep, how do you think Piper as a platform would you know how can it inculcate more innovation in today's kids? Like we need more entrepreneurs, we need more founders. How is your platform going to help these kids discover some of those skills?
Yeah, no, it's a great question because I think the way that we teach now, like the model of there's a teacher standing in front of the classroom, like you have to do these assignments, a lot of times, like they're not where innovation really happens at this point. A lot of innovation happens from people coming together, from people with very diverse skill sets, sort of working together and being like, well, this is a shared problem we have. how would I solve it as an engineer versus a biologist versus an artist? Like, how do those solutions come together to be like the big thing? Um, and what I think Piper's power comes from is the fact that it is breaking that model of having a teacher standing at the front of the classroom. It's game based. Like basically in the game you build your own computer and then you're sort of thrown into this world where you have characters, where you have this like robot and a little mouse whose voice is actually my voice. But those characters are sort of going on journeys trying to solve problems, and they use the tech that you build in front of you to actually solve those problems in the game. So from a very early point, if we can start getting kids to think about like, okay, if I run into a problem, my immediate like solution can be to create the solution. That sort of innovative mindset, I think, is what's going to carry the next generation of founders, creators, all of the things that you just mentioned we need.
Yeah, and I think from whatever you told me, and from I've myself spent a bunch of my years in India. I don't think any such company exists right now in India. How do you look at India market? Like, what are the initial signals that you are getting from the market so far?
It's interesting because you're right. I think the US market is very open to new models of education. It's very open to like, okay, you're going to use gaming, like this paradigm is sort of easier to introduce in the US. And I sort of fall in this like interesting position where my parents immigrated to the US from India. I grew up in this country, but I've always sort of had the Indian like mentality of education like drilled into me. And so now when we're talking about expanding to India, a lot of like the market analysis, like the stuff we've been looking at, is not really new to me, but it's new to a lot of people I work with where they're like, oh, wait, but India is very education focused. Like it's a very parents are very committed to their kids' education, where education means this old paradigm, I think, in a lot of ways, where like what we've seen in the past year has been taking that paradigm and putting it online, and that's challenging for students. So I think we're coming into the market at a really interesting point where I think a lot of Indian parents, a lot of Indian education is starting to realize that, like having a classroom online isn't as engaging as we like hoped it would be. And I think we're opening up a lot more to these like alternative ways of teaching. And I think it's like a really great point for Piper to be able to sort of make our foray into the Indian market, because I think
Yeah.
that's a key thing. Yeah.
I think that this is a question which I will come back to later. I think this is a very important point that I want to ask both of you, as we go through, how the conventional models of education are getting disrupted. Before we come to that, I would, want to bring in the other element of the EdTech segment, and I would want to direct my question to Gaurang. So this is education, early education. What you are trying to do is basically you're telling people that CVs are going to get redundant in the next couple of years, like
Yeah.
or the process of finding the right skilled people is going to be disrupted. While there is always a gap that I see, that on one end we have this talented, this employee population in India and across the world who have different skill sets, and on the other hand, companies are facing a lot of shortage in talent. So, I wanted to ask you firstly, how did you start with Indos as a
Mhm.
company? Was it always a blockchain-backed idea? Because you're the blockchain guys. What I could perceive from the internet. You are into NFTs and you know what all you're doing. But specifically to education, how did you think about this concept? And secondly, how are you trying to address this gap between the employers and finding the right skill set of employees? So, what's your journey been?
Definitely, yeah. So actually, we started with this idea because so my previous company, Atorus, a company in Singapore, in Atorus, we were trying to issue diplomas on the blockchain, diplomas and degrees on blockchain. And actually, we did a POC with a Singaporean university, and for one or two of their batches, their actual graduates, they were issuing diplomas on the blockchain. Now that project has gone off, and the entire country of Singapore is issuing that diplomas on the blockchain right now. All the universities, all higher institutes of learning, everything is being issued on the blockchain, digital certificates. Anyway, so after we did that company, we were thinking, hey, just issuing diplomas on the blockchain is okay, but as a company, as a startup, the model was not really scalable for us. So we were looking for a more scalable model in this case, and that's when we thought about this. We looked at LinkedIn, and we were like, hey, why? How can we improve LinkedIn? How can we improve CVs in the first place? And one of the triggers for that was the crisis in Syria, because in Syria you had these wars going on and all these things going on, right? So there were a lot of refugees coming to Europe, coming to countries like Germany or UK or all these countries, and there were some really high skilled refugees coming to these European countries, but they couldn't get commensurate jobs because there were some doctors or some engineers, and their degrees were not valid anymore because their university back in Syria did not exist at this point of time. So that was actually one of the triggers for starting Endorse. We thought, hey, why don't we focus on skills instead of degrees? Why don't we focus on skills instead of CVs? And that's how we started Endorse at that time. So one of the ways in which we could at that time disrupt LinkedIn or improve on LinkedIn or CVs was that instead of focusing on what you learned, instead of focusing on the degree that you got, we were focusing on how skilled you are. And again, one of the motivations for us, one of the inspirations for us was the peer reviews that happen in scientific journals, right? So when you write or publish a scientific paper, a committee of your peers actually looks at your scientific paper, and then they say whether, okay, this paper is good or not, whether this paper should be included in the journal or not. Similarly, on Endorse, you have a committee of your peers. In this case, we mainly focus on software developers, coders. So we have a committee of your peers who are expert software developers from companies like Mercedes, Google, all these big companies, or even smaller startups. And these people, they look at your code, they look at your submissions. So let's say, Shambhavi, you're hiring for 10 software developers, and you get 100 applications for that. What happens is you ask all those 100 people to go through a coding test on Endorse, and the code submissions are looked at by a committee of your expert software developers, and they say whether, okay, this candidate is good enough for the company or not good enough. And they also give you suggestions for improvements. So they tell you how you can improve your coding, how you can improve your knowledge, how you can improve your skills. So that's mainly the crux of Endorse. And all these comments, all these reviews are actually put on the blockchain, and we incentivize these experts using blockchain technology, using cryptocurrencies, and that's where the blockchain aspects comes in here.
So also, you transitioned from a B2C model to a B2B. How did that decision take place, and was it specifically keeping the India market in mind, or what was the driving force behind that?
No, so when we started the company, we soon realized that we had a lot of competition, and actually to stand out, one of the best ways for us going forward was to go through the B2B model. So again, we partnered with another Singaporean university, and we started focusing on upskilling, because in the hiring market we had a lot of competition, and it was a little difficult to stand out. But we soon realized, and we found our niche in the upskilling market. So, for example, we partnered with Neon Polytechnic in Singapore, and along with them, we are working on an upskilling program for a bank called OCBC Bank in Singapore. So OCBC wanted to upskill their existing employees and teach them about data science, about data analytics. So the university does the teaching, university does the courses, and they use the Endorse assessments to actually make sure that the candidates are actually learning and they can actually code on the job. So what happens is, after learning every module, let's say Python 1 or Python 2, they undergo a coding test on Endorse. And unless and until they pass the coding test, they cannot move on to the next module. So I think that's where we found our niche. That's where we found that, okay, Endorse model really works. And this model of peer reviews is, the bank and all the clients, they love it because they understand that after you pass a set of 9 or 10 coding tests, the candidates can actually start coding on the job. When they go back to the job, when they go back to their desks, they can actually start coding. And I think that's really interesting. And that actually brings me to the second part of your question, which is addressing the skill gap within the within the industry right now. And I think that's one really big problem, especially in countries like India. Again, India is heavily education focused, as Shri was saying, but seldom in our curriculums do students actually learn how to code on the job.
Yeah.
So if you look at a few surveys, if you look at a lot of literature out in the market, a very small percentage of engineers, software engineers, are actually job ready, and that's one problem we wanted to address in India as well. And that's why we do a lot of coding competitions. We do a lot of online hackathons where students can come, they can actually start working on some innovative projects. They can hone their coding skills, and hopefully they get ready for the job market.
I think in India, especially, I'm also from an Indian origin, did my education in India. And I remember whatever I learned in university, none of those things I had to undertake courses separately. Even when I joined Infosys as a software engineer, and they made me do a 6 months, training, So how have you, like, what has you're present in multiple geographies now, you've scaled into multiple countries. What has been some of the distinct features around the India market strategy that stood out? Like, did you have to specifically work on your product or pricing or the way you would approach companies? What has been the similarities and some of the categorical differences that you saw pertaining to the India market?
Yeah, so I'd say pricing was definitely a big change we had to make, because if you're selling in countries which are not India, these countries are not as price sensitive as the Indian market. And especially in India, we are kind of also targeting the B2C market. So in India, we are mainly targeting B2B, while in India, B2C working out for us. So we get a lot of hackathon participants from India. We get a lot of students and young engineers who really want to come and start coding and showcase their coding skills. So that has really worked well for us in India. Also, one of the more, I say this every time, before before getting investment from Times Group, the Times of India Group, I'm a digitally native person. I've been developing coding for a lot of years now. And I did not really believe that physical newspapers, really hold so much sway in India. And that was a pleasant surprise for me, right? When we did our first advertisement in India, the response that we got was amazing. And that just convinced me that in India, at least, people still believe in print media. And they still think that if you are in the print media, you are legitimate. And that was really eye-opening for me, I'd say.
That's impressive, and yes, I mean, Indos has become a case study for internally also. Like I've been talking to personally, also I've been talking to a lot of companies in the upskilling category, and India is a strong market because all the international companies, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, they all have the Asian headquarters in India, based on Bangalore, Hyderabad, Mumbai. There is an imminent need to upskill this talent workforce. And like you said, the concept of age-old CVs, that's going to become, because people need skills to be validated, So I think that's an interesting thing. Tell me one thing, and this question is directed to both of you, and maybe Gaurang, you could answer this. This question that we face when a lot of international entrepreneurs also get intimidated by the current edtech landscape in India. I mean, as we speak, 4 unicorns in education tech are from India, but we have Baiju, we have Upgrad, we have Erudit. How do you guys find that as a threat? And what would you tell some of these founders who are eyeing the India market to get a pie of the growing demand right now? How would you look at, or what's your take on number one, on the competition, and the second thing is also the consolidation wave, like Baiju is going left, right, center, acquiring companies, maybe killing competition by just acquisition. what would your recommendation to some of these founders would be? So Gaurang, you can go first, and then I'll go to Shri on that.
No, I think, see, definitely companies like Baiju, Upgrad, these are behemoths in India. And I would say these companies are really inspirational and we should all learn from them. Definitely. That's one. And second is, see, the market in India is huge. It's just massive, right? There are millions of engineers graduating every year. And I think there's enough space for a lot more companies right now. The market is far from being saturated. Again, cities like Bangalore or Pune might be saturated, but you have so many tier two and tier three cities where there's so much opportunities available right now. So I think it's okay. Yeah, we should all, yeah, we shouldn't feel threatened by them. Definitely. Yeah.
Shri, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. I think the competition is actually kind of a good thing here because I think it speaks to the fact that India is really actively looking right now. I think we're in a phase where India is actively looking for the best product out there. So it's like a period of a lot of really rapid innovation where people are coming up with really cool things. And so I think being one of those companies, like for all of the founders who might be looking at India, if you guys have a product that is very innovative that could shape how like the education landscape in India looks, then I think this is a great time to go into India because I think people are actively looking for it. One other thing I think is really fascinating, sort of building on Gaurang's point. I think these like behemoth companies like Baiju, Erudite, like these are fantastic models for
Mm.
how education in India can be done. So like the edtech landscape in India is really diffuse. Like there's no like consolidated buying authority for education. Like we're hoping to work a bit with like B2G to be able to introduce Piper into a lot of schools, but at the end of the day, there isn't like one consolidated buying authority in India. And I think these companies have figured out a really great way to be able to reach a lot of people. And I think building off those models to be able
Mm.
to reach the consumers in India that we want to reach is actually a really great model to be able to follow as well.
That's interesting. And I mean, of course, COVID has impacted all of it. Shri, what do you think? Like, you've been an innovator, you've been an entrepreneur, what would the next phase of education tech look like? Like, we're reaching massive levels of funding, consolidation, everything's good. But where do you see, what are some of where do you see, number one, this sector heading? Number two, what are the other aspects which you think are currently not being looked at in for the early education, for pre-K ed tech or for K-12 segment that founders across the world should think of, whether it is social learning or whether it is, what's your take on the future of education?
Yeah, no, I think if you asked me this question like 2 years ago, my answer would have been completely different. I think the pandemic just sort of flipped everything on its head, and things that we didn't think were like things that you needed tech to be able to solve have now become things that like all of our products need to really focus on because they're issues that didn't exist before and they exist now. The biggest one is one that you actually mentioned. I think the fact that kids have been out of school for going on more than a year almost now in India, I think it speaks to a really missed learning opportunity where like even just the physical experience of being around kids your own age does a lot for your like social emotional growth, for how you interact with peers. And yes, a lot of that is sort of like recapitulated by being online, like being on the Zoom call and pointing at each other. Like some of it is still there. And I think it's incredible that we've still kept parts of it alive. But at the end of the day, physically not being in person, physically not being able to sort of break off into your little groups and go talk to friends, that has an impact. And so I think in products, having sort of a social element built in becomes something that's really important. it's something that we've tried to do with Piper in the past, just in how we've like set up the narrative storylines. You have characters as opposed to just like, okay, these are words on a screen, just like you see in school. Like having those like game elements in there helps a bit. But I think, especially as we grow, as a bunch of companies are coming out with new ideas, a big focus should at least be on the end of making sure that kids have a chance to interact in this like new sort of world that they've got thrown into. And even as things go back to normal, I think this is one of those things that we're not going to feel completely back to, we'll feel the repercussions of this for a while. Like the ripple effect from this time in life will be felt for a while. And making sure kids have as many tools as they can to sort of still educate themselves during it is going to be very powerful.
Yeah, I think after school learning is going to play a significant role in,
Yeah.
schools is one aspect, but now parents also need to make sure that the after school time or whatever
Yeah.
time they're away from their friends and peers, it's well planned and well, used for. Gaurang, what's your take? I mean, while I understand you're on the upskilling side, these days parents in India are also making sure that their kids learn coding right from when they are in grade 5. How do you see tech skills being inculcated into, the early childhood phase so that, by the time the kids graduate, they have an idea about developing their own small products, so that from an early stage itself, the kid's mind is honed to, more of thoughts like creation and, entrepreneurship. What's your intuition on that?
See, I always joke around, no, but only half-heartedly. But what I say is every kid should learn English, their own mother tongue, and either Java or Python. So I definitely think that coding is a very necessary skill, and everyone should learn coding. Because see, as Sri was saying, every job in the next 10, 15 years is going to be a tech job, be it medicine, be it transport, be it anything, space. It's going to be tech based, and I think everyone has to learn coding. There is, if you want to survive for the next 20, 30 years, like, yeah, coding is the way to go, definitely.
So will we have an endorse for kids also very soon on the product roadmap?
That's a good idea.
We can work with you on that, Gaurang.
Yeah, definitely.
That's great. Okay, before I wrap up the panel, I want you guys to give a very candid opinion to founders, who are looking to enter India. What are some of the key aspects they should evaluate, whether it is the product market fit, what stage should they be at, what are some of the do's and don'ts basis your learning, when any founder who's looking at India should be aware of. Gaurang, maybe you can go first and then I'll go Shri.
Sure. I think localizing your product is very important when you're entering India. Also, looking at the market and understanding the market dynamics, the way consumers are driven is very important. So, for example, I'll give you a simple example. Like in case of a food delivery app, my sister back in Pune, she has 3 options: Zomato, Swiggy, and Deliveroo. Food Panda, 4 or 5 options actually. And in India, it's heavily based on price. So if you want to order from the same restaurant, sometimes people look at these 3 apps. Whichever app has the most discounts, people use that app. So I think you need to understand this consumer mindset. That's very important. And if you understand that, if you understand the psyche of the users, I think you're going to succeed definitely.
Anything on the stage, like often founders think, am I ready for India? Or maybe first I should look at US market, then probably go to Europe, and then maybe think of India. Like anything from a stage perspective, how should a founder know that he or she is ready for India?
I think that depends on a case-to-case basis. But in case of a B2C market, if you have a very global product similar to what Piper is doing, it's quite easy to go to India, right? Even when you're slightly established as a company. In case of a B2B company, you need to establish some relationships, or you need to have a partner like the Times Group who can introduce you to the right people. Then it's much easier to penetrate the Indian market, I would say. But yeah, so if you're a B2C global product, then yeah, you can just expand that.
That's great. That's very helpful. Ashri, what's your take on that?
I love that Gorung mentioned the price point because it's something we've been thinking a lot about. Our Piper computer kits, like the big computer that you build yourself, and it's sort of standalone as a product. It's a pretty high price point. And when we were thinking about India, one of the big innovations that our company has been working on is creating a product that actually plugs into your computer directly, and so you can drag and drop code on your browser, like in your computer, that you already have at home. And that product plays much better in the Indian market, in part because, of course, a lot of Indian kids who would be like the consumer market that we're targeting, a lot of those kids have laptops, but also because the price point is something that's a lot more reasonable to parents. So that's a key thing I think for us as well. So I'm glad to hear you. I'm glad to hear you say that.
So localization, pricing, having a strategic partner. Any
Yeah,
other country?
I think the one big thing, especially for India, I think is positioning the brand as like a very education first brand. I think that's been a key thing for us, like making sure that we have these game elements, but at our core, we are an education company. We teach kids how to code, how to build electronics, the basics of electrical engineering. That's what we teach. And making sure that that message comes across clearly in India is a really big thing. So I think for ed tech companies out there, the right positioning can make a world of difference.
On that point, I don't know, Sri, about your parents, but my parents always used to say, "Hey, don't play games on your computer. Go and study. Get good marks
Yes.
in the exams."
Yeah, and
Yeah,
half the world
agree.
is on Roblox these days. I wish I could tell my
Exactly.
parents. Yeah. So that's
What do
amazing.
people
I mean,
do from?
sometimes when I look at the innovation that's happening in education, I was like, what if we had access to such platforms rather than just NCRT books? Like so much, it could have been so much more imaginative. But it's good. Like I think the kids of tomorrow definitely need more empathy, more learning, more innovation, entrepreneurship. Be more ready for the real world than the textbook world. So I think with that I will wrap up this panel. Thank you so much, Gaurang. It has been an incredible conversation and very excited to have Endorse and Piper both as a part of the Times Group portfolio, Brand Capital's portfolio. And I hope you guys continue to soar and create waves in India, as well as transform lives of kids who are continued to glued with education and exams and test preps and competition and numbers. So with that, thank you very much.